Mr. Kramer, you're recognized. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations on the gavel. And thanks to all of our witnesses for this irrevocable gift of your time, time that is getting late. Now, I've sat here a long time and I've listened to pretty much everything, and there have been a couple of passing references to smart cars or autonomous vehicles, but I'm going to bring up a completely different topic. So, a completely different context, at least, for a similar topic. So my home state of North Dakota is home to the Northern Plains UAS test site, one of the 6 FAA designated test sites designated in 2013. And as you likely know, remotely piloted aircraft are going to play are playing an increasing role in important duties like disaster recovery, monitoring pipelines, precision agriculture. Obviously, there are the obvious military applications. And as a result of our test site, we have a rather unique enhanced use lease at the Grand Forks Air Force Base, where there's a private sector business park at the same place as on the air base, you know, with the appropriate security divisions and whatnot. It's quite unique. And for military contractors, which we've attracted to the park, you know, spectrum is fairly easy. Of course, it's a military issue. But for the private sector, where I think the real opportunity and real growth lies for testing aircraft, testing equipment, you know, training pilots, research and development, there's been a challenge as it relates. In fact, was a specific situation not that long ago where a company was testing and wanting to demonstrate the use of their cameras and video, and they literally could not do it because of a fairly basic spectrum issue. All of that being said, going forward, how do you see spectrum allocation as it relates to UAS, and how do you see it being resolved, improved upon? NTIA's obviously their role, and other agencies, and what can we as Congress do to help clarify it? And I throw that to all of you, and it'll be my only question, Madam Chair.
So spectrum is going to be very important for unmanned aircraft in a variety of ways. First of all, the command and control of aircraft, particularly as you start looking at beyond line of sight uses. And there's going to be different types of needs depending on the type of aircraft and the operations themselves. So right now, you can fly using unlicensed, but that's not going to be true for the longer range flights. So spectrum is going to be very important. The FCC is going to be important because they're going to have the rules for commercial uses. The FAA is going to be important because they're the ones that are going to try to regulate to make everything safe and make sure that they meet requirements to make them safe. And NTIA is important because there's going to be interagency coordination. And so spectrum is something that the agencies are very focused on currently. There's internationally allocated spectrum for unmanned aircraft, and it's a specific aeronautical spectrum. And then there's also other spectrum that can be utilized that will also be very significant for the expansion of this industry that is moving so quickly. And as you noted, the North Dakota test site is an important part of that.
So Ms. Gomez has beautifully described the complication of the issue. So as a result going forward, how can we help streamline? Because you've articulated perfectly how difficult this is, especially command and control, which is where the real opportunity rests. Thoughts?
I would highlight, it's many of the things that we've talked about today, the future of our communications networks overlap jurisdictions. Mm-hmm. And I think what we need to encourage is to make sure that we remain on the cutting edge of innovation. And I think, UAS is one where, they're using them in England. We're not using them really here. So I think it's one place where I think with Congress's oversight, we can make sure that we don't overregulate budding innovations and budding industries so that we can maintain our innovative edge and competitive edge against other countries around the world.
Thank you. Mr. Newer.
The only thing I would add, apart from the long-term deployment of unmanned vehicles, with regards to the test site, there are private test sites, there are military test sites that are typically in very remote areas. And those remote areas are typically not at all spectrum constrained in the real world,
yes,
but they're spectrum constrained by the issuance of those licenses. We issue licenses on national bases or wide geographic areas, and you could turn on a spectrum analyzer and say there's no one here, but the authorities are held by someone else. creating governance processes where there are the opportunity and the ability of diverse carriers to say, you know what, I'm not out there. And, you know, here's how we can collaborate, and here's how you can use my spectrum, how you can have transactional agreements in those areas, I think clarifies or will get the regulatory out of the way of the technological in those test areas. So
Thank you all very much, and Madam Chair, I yield back.